So the saint's very important to us. I thought I'd jump in to talk. I'm not sure, what your prior knowledge is, but I thought I'd jump in kind of explaining a little bit on the process of canonization. So you can't be a saint until you've died. A saint, I always teach the students, there's lowercase s saints, and anyone in heaven is a saint. We're all called to be saints, all called to be lowercase s saints. And so hopefully my grandma and grandpa are saints in heaven. Still pray for them in case they're in purgatory, but hopefully they're saints. But then our church will raise up to capital S saint level certain souls that show a life of virtue that we can then follow their example. And so the process to raise those people up to be a capital S saint used to be very complicated, and then John Paul II kind of streamlined it. And so the first step, after you die, they kind of they look into your life, they interview people who knew you, they read the things that you wrote, and if you seem to have lived a life of virtue, then you'll be declared a servant of God. And so that's still where Father Emil Capon is. I won't talk very much about him because I think we're pretty familiar with his story. But then, Father Capon has had a miracle that's been attributed to him, so they've sent that investigation off to the Vatican, and I don't know how long it's going to take them, but hopefully, any day now, we're going to hear that Father Capon, they've looked into his miracle, and it's been approved, and he gets to advance to the next step in the process, or maybe he'll even get to jump over the next step. The next step is being declared venerable. So, venerable is a special title once they've really investigated a little bit further into your life, continued with the interview process, and they can really say this person has lived a life of virtue. Why do they have this long process? Well, really, they want to make sure they're not raising up as an example someone that isn't a good example. I remember growing up in the 80s, I remember this man that was in our religion book. They usually have a story about a saint at the end of every chapter, and I remember this because it was one of the first photos I'd seen. It was the only photo of a holy person in this book. And so when I was in college, I still remembered his name. I still remember learning about it, and I was like, oh, I wonder if he's, he hadn't been declared a saint yet. Maybe he's a saint now. And so I Googled him and found out, no, he's not. As they kept looking into his life, they found a lot of secrets in his life, and so he did not continue on in the process. I don't think he made it to the servant of God phase. I think this religion book in the 80s was just really gung-ho about, somebody new, and okay, the kids will like this. So, Catholic Church wants to make sure we're raising up good heroes that we can follow their example. So this young lady, she has been declared venerable. Her name is Antoinetta Mayo, and if she does become a saint, she'll be the youngest non-martyr saint in our church. When she was 5 years old, she was diagnosed with bone cancer, and her leg was amputated. But she just had a faith and a wisdom far beyond her years. She would write little letters. As soon as she learned how to write, she would write little notes to Jesus and leave it by the statue in her room so that he could read them while she was sleeping. And so some of those prayers she wrote have been saved. She wrote, "Help me, grant me your grace, and give me back my leg. If you don't want to, then may your will be done." Before her first communion day, she wrote, "Dear Jesus Eucharist, I am so very, very happy that you have come into my heart. Never leave my heart. Stay forever and ever with me. Jesus, I love you so. I want to let myself go in your arms and do what you will with me. Oh, loving Jesus, give me souls. Give me a great many. So, especially for your young students, this is a saint that I think we can all relate with saints that are at that point in our life. You know, when I was younger, young saints really called out to me. Now that I'm a very tired dad, you know, these saints that knew what it meant to be a father and how exhausting that was, those are the saints I have recourse to. So, once the church has looked into your life, the next step is to be declared a blessed, or to be beatified. This can be done two different ways. If they see that you died a martyr, you can be raised up to a blessed that way. Or you can have your first confirmed miracle. So since Father Capon wasn't a martyr, that's what they're looking for, his first confirmed miracle. And the pole vaulter who fell, that's the first miracle that the diocese has sent off. So for that stage of the process, I picked one of my favorite saints, Blessed Pierre Giorgio Frassati. And so I really like blesseds because they're just one miracle away from being canonized. If they get one more confirmed miracle after they're declared, then they will be canonized a saint. So when I teach my students about blesseds, I remind them, if you're ever needing a miracle, these are some great people to pray to. And maybe you'll be the miracle that helps them to become a saint. So Blessed Pierre Giorgio Frassati, we have so many photos of him. And when you can see their smile and see they're a real person, I think it just helps you to be so much closer to them. Pierre Giorgio Frassati, his parents were not religious. He learned about the faith from his grandmother. He was born in 1901. And we have a few family stories of when he was little. Because his parents didn't pray, every night at dinner time, his mom would call out. He grew up in Italy, so here's my terrible Italian accent. His mom would call out, "Pierre Giorgio, dinner time!" And she'd hear him upstairs, boom, 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 boom. He'd get to the stairs, he'd slide down the banister, shh, boom. Boom, 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 boom. And he'd run into the dinner table. And every night, that's what happened. Pierre Giorgio, dinner time! Boom, 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 boom. Shh, boom. Boom, 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 boom. And so finally she said, "Pierre Giorgio, why every night? Why you stop at the bottom of the stairs? What are you doing?" He said, "Well, Mama, I know that Papa does not like to pray at dinner time, so that's when I always remember to pray before I come into dinner." There's another story of a boy knocking at the door of their house, and Pierre opening and seeing this poor beggar boy in the winter snow without shoes on. And Pierre looked around to make sure his father wasn't watching and took off his own shoes and said, "Go, go, go." When he graduated from high school, his father said, "Well, you can either have a car or $1,000. And Pierre took the $1,000 and donated it to the poor. But he wasn't some super holy, always having your head down, pious person that no one else wanted to be around because, he was just so serious. He was a very, very joyful saint. He loved climbing in the mountains. He loved being with his friends. They started a group called the Sinister Ones. And their motto was the few, the proud, the macaroni. And that shows the type of joy that permeated his whole life. He's probably the only saint that we have a picture dragging a keg of wine through the streets, enjoying a party with a paper hat on his head. But, again, this balance in his life. He would go to Mass in the morning. He worked out a system with his family's gardener. He didn't want to wake up everybody else in his family, so he would tie a rope to his fist and then throw the rope out the window. And in the morning, when the gardener got there, he'd tug on the rope, and that would wake Pierre up so he could go to Mass. He would tell his friends, when I go to Mass in the morning, my soul flies up to the heavens. and so I need to go hiking in the mountains to look for it. He loved hiking in the mountains. He'd go on these hikes with his friends, and he'd be the one to say, hey, while we're hiking, let's pray a decade of the rosary. He loved spending time in adoration. One time his friend saw him, kneeling by the wall and just so enwrapped in prayer that the candle above him was just dripping wax down on his head, and he wasn't noticing. So he'd take flowers every day to a Marian shrine nearby, and he'd say, I need to take flowers to my Madonna. And we have these letters that he wrote to his friends. After a prayer vigil, I feel stronger, safer, more secure, and even happier. He was also very involved in the politics of Italy at this time. He was very distressed by Mussolini's rise to power, and so he tried to be very active. He wrote to a friend, it's better to stand alone, but with a clean conscience, than to stand with all the rest, but with a giant stain on our conscience. There have to be at least some Catholics who can hold their heads up high and declare that not all of us are traitors. Mussolini introduced a bill to limit freedom of association. It was meant to target secret society groups, but the wording allowed the government to interfere in any organization. And so there was times where he would be on a Marian procession, and they would be confronted by crowds. But even though these processions kept getting shut down, he still continued to participate in them. There was another time where there was a bulletin board in the community that was announcing adoration. And so as he was putting it up, this anti-clerical group came up to him. He's very outnumbered, but he still stood up to them and came home covered in cuts and bruises, but was able to hold his head up high that he had defended his faith. One of his friends wrote, I often noticed how during the most heated debates, Pier Giorgio went out of his way to show respect and kindness towards his opponent, as if to show that he was fighting an idea, not the individual. So, just the layers of this man, his sense of humor, with a very deep awareness of what was going on in his country, his love of the poor, which I'm going to get to next. But I don't want to. I'm looking through, making sure I'm remembering all. There's just so many great stories that his sister has wrote down, details from his life. He trained his horse that while they were riding past the church, the horse would stop and do a small genuflection. One time his friends, I think you might have seen in the last picture, mountain climbing, he's smoking a pipe, and one of his friends said, Pierre, why do you smoke a pipe? And he said, well, what do you expect? My mother smoked while she was nursing me. Just a very joyful heart. But also, finally, very, very concerned with the poor. He once wrote, Jesus comes to me every day in communion, and I return the visit by going to serve the poor. His grandmother became sick, and then he contracted tuberculosis from one of the people he was visiting. And so as she was dying, Stanley did not realize his health was declining until it was too late. He died when he was 24 years old. His first miracle involved a man who was cured from tuberculosis, but his second miracle that they've sent off for his cause, that's the one I think is most amazing. It involves a man named Kevin Becker. He fell from the second story of a building. He fractured his skull in 5 places and damaged every lobe of his brain. The doctors thought he wouldn't live, and if he did, there would be serious defects. His mother was sent a holy card of Pier Giorgio and encouraged to ask this saint, this blessed, for intercession. She placed the holy card by her son's hospital bed. 3 weeks later, he walked out of the hospital, tossing a football with his brother. And so a while later, he was telling his mother about something he remembered while he was in the coma. He said he had this long dream that it was kind of like a timeless day. He was in his apartment, he woke up and heard someone downstairs already. And he thought that's strange because usually he was the first one to wake up out of all his roommates. He went downstairs and this man said, "Hi, I'm George, your new roommate." So they spent a day together. Kevin wanted to leave the house, but this George wouldn't let him. He told his mom, "We thought like we were brothers." George encouraged him, "Be patient, do your homework." They played some soccer video games together. And then that was the end of what he remembered from when he was in the coma. His mother showed him the holy card that she put by his bed. And he said, "Yeah, that's what George looked like." So these saints, they're not just people that lived 100 years ago. They want to still be involved in our life and to continue to help us along the way. His motto was Verso l'alto, which in Italian means to the heights. Then once you have your second confirmed miracle, then you are canonized a saint. And so for this, I've chosen St. John Paul II. And I don't know, I won't give you very many book recommendations, but one of the best saint books I've read that is just filled with these details is a book, I think it's by Jason Everett, called John Paul the Great, His Five Loves. And almost all these stories come from that book. So, let's see here. Now I'm already looking at the time like, okay, I've got to be selective, got to pick which stories I'm going to tell. So, John Paul's mother died when he was just 8 years old. And then his brother Edmund died when he was 11. His father died when he was 20. So encountered great sadness at an early age. During his time in the seminary, he had to hide in the basement from the Nazis as they came into Poland. And then that seminary was used as a jail. And so afterwards, John Paul, at the time his name was still Carroll, he volunteered to be one of the seminarians that would go and help clean up these buildings. And so the bathroom, the prisoners in the jail, the bathrooms weren't working, and so they just kept using the restroom in there. And then the winter set in and everything froze. And so John Paul volunteered to chop up the excrement and cart it out. His friend that was with it later wrote in a book he wrote, it was hardly a symbolic way to celebrate victory and liberty now that the Nazis were gone, but it wasn't bad for a future successor of St. Peter. But then Poland traded one tyrannical government for another. By 1955, the communist government had imprisoned over 2,000 priests and nuns. By this time, Karol Wojtyła was a priest himself. He taught at the band seminary and also at the Catholic University. And he would take people camping with him, but these public excursions with the priests were forbidden. So the youth that would go camping with him, they called him wujek or uncle. Finally, he became a bishop and then a cardinal. And at this time, the Catholic Church was tolerated, but you had to apply to the government for permission to do pretty much everything. And the communist government would not approve processions with religious images. They were very strict about traveling visas, and they continued to deny building permits to build new churches for the growing Catholic Church in Poland. And so Cardinal Wojtyła, he said, we will make visible what is invisible. They would process through the streets with an empty frame. And they said, the Catholics of Poland know that we are processing for Our Lady. It was Poland's, I think, 1,000th anniversary of Catholicism. They wanted to invite the Pope to come celebrate Mass there. but the government wouldn't give the Pope a visa to visit. And so the cardinal, he placed an empty cathedra chair for the Pope that the Pope would have sat in. When they wouldn't give him building permits, they just continued to celebrate Mass outdoors at the site of where they wanted to build these new churches, until finally the government would get so frustrated because these huge crowds outdoors were attracting so much attention. Finally, they caved and granted the permits. So eventually, John Paul became Pope, and his papacy was marked by many things, but especially a love of the Eucharist and a love of Mary. And so organizers of events were told not to let the Pope pass in view of a chapel, or he would stop and throw off the whole schedule. But once he was walking down the halls, and he just stopped at an unmarked door, and he turned to the tour guide, and he just shook his finger like this and opened the door. They'd taken off the sign for the chapel so he wouldn't see it, but he still knew, and he went and spent time in praying there. Another time he stopped at a seminary that he'd never been at before. He just went in the doors and went directly to the chapel as if he knew exactly where it was. So many other great stories. But, growing up with John Paul as the Pope, he was just such a dynamic Pope. He started World Youth Day, traveled all around the world. There's witnesses that one day he was passing by this little girl who was disabled, and she said, "Bless me, Holy Father, bless me." And he said, "First, you bless me." But what struck me is how he gave us such a great example also of bearing suffering. As Parkinson's took its toll on him, he really was a witness to how we can offer up our crosses. He wrote, "Jesus did not die so that we would never have to suffer. He died to show us how to suffer. He removed the threat of eternal suffering while revealing the power of temporal suffering." So, now that we kind of know the process, I thought for our next section, I talked just a little bit. All of those saints right there were white so far. And growing up, that was most of what I saw. This book here is pretty much all white saints. But as I taught students, I realized how important it is for them to be able to identify with these saints too. It's so important for them to see that our Catholic Church is the universal church, and then we have saints from all around the world. So I'd like to talk about a few of our saints. We have so many great saints from around the world: Martin of Tours, Rose of Lima, Andrew Kim Taigon, Paul Miki, but we have several from the last 150 years. And so I want to start off with St. Josephine Bakhita here. When she was 8 years old, she grew up in the Sudan, and when she was 8 years old, she was kidnapped and then forced to march over 600 miles to the slave market, forced to march barefoot. Over the next 12 years, she was sold and traded over a dozen times. She was beaten, and later when she became a sister, they counted over 114 scars on her body. Eventually, she did gain her freedom, and she became a sister. She served as the doorkeeper for her order, and she spoke and helped to train the sisters that were preparing to go to Africa as missionaries. They asked her, "Sister, what would you say to the people that kidnapped you?" And she said, "I would thank them, for without them, I might have never learned about Christ." Whenever anybody asked her, how are you today, sister?" Her immediate response was always, "As the Master desires." Our next saint is from Mexico, from the persecution in Mexico just 100 years ago. Father Miguel Pro, he had to go overseas to be trained as a priest. There's a story of on his ordination day, his fellow classmates, they all then went out into the church and gave their first blessings to their parents there to attend their ordination mass. Father Miguel had to go back to his dormitory room and laid out the picture of his mother and father on his bed and gave them his first blessing from overseas. But then he came back to Mexico because he knew the people there needed a priest to give them the sacraments. And so because of the persecution in the 1920s, he had to secretly go about Mexico City. He would wear different disguises. He would dress as a police officer. He would dress as a worker. There was one day when the police were chasing him. And so he turned a corner and he saw a young woman up ahead. And so he linked arms with her and he said, "Please help me, I'm a priest." Hoping she'd just keep walking along with him and that would be enough to throw off the priest. But she went a little bit further. And so she pushed him up against the wall and started making out with him. And the police ran by. "Oh, that can't be him." They kept searching for him. But eventually they did capture Father Miguel Pro, and they decided at his execution to have photographers present, so that way they could put those pictures in the newspaper of when he begged for mercy, and it would show all the Catholics that their brave hero priest, how he cowered before the soldiers. But that's not what happened. We have the photos of them leading him out. Him kneeling down to pray before he died, and then him stretching out his arms, and he yelled, "Viva Cristo Rey," before they shot him. Another saint from the Cristero War is Saint Jose Sanchez del Rio. And I love these two pictures here. I think, if we could show this to every young boy and say, that's what we're called to. This is him on his first communion day, the faith and devotion, but then also the courage to go into battle and fight for your faith. So in battle, his general's horse was shot, and so Jose Sanchez del Rio said, "My general, take my horse." He was captured when he was 14 years old. It was actually his godfather who sentenced him, who tried to persuade him to abandon his faith. But at 14 years old, he would not. They sliced the bottoms of his feet and made him walk to his place of execution. Just so many examples of whatever you're going through in your life to be uplifted and to see how these saints have carried on through great trials and great hardship. Another young saint, Blessed Laura Vicuna. She's from South America. I can't remember if it's Argentina or Chile. But she went to a Catholic school, but her mother was a mistress to kind of a rich landowner. And so as Laura grew up, she started to realize what was going on and really worried for her mother. And so one day at the Catholic school, the sisters were reading from Scripture, and they read, "No greater love is there than this, to lay down one's life for a friend." And that Scripture, that stayed in Laura's heart. And so the next day at church, she prayed to Jesus. She said, "Please, I will give my life so my mother can be saved." This boyfriend, he was very abusive. And so one day he was coming after her mother, and Laura kind of got between them, and he beat her. She was taken to the hospital, but there was damage that she wasn't going to live through. And so on her deathbed, she told her mother about the promise she had made, and her mother, repented and changed her life. St. Mary MacKillop was just canonized about 10 years ago, and she's the first and only canonized saint from Australia. And so I remember reading in the newspaper how when she was canonized, it was the biggest celebration in the streets since the Sydney Olympics. The people of Australia were so happy to finally have a saint of their own. But her story is very interesting. Basically, this is in 1870, and she knew of a priest that was sexually abusing children, and so she reported him, and then faced retaliation from other priests that were not happy about her turning in this priest. And so first she was accused of having a drinking problem. Eventually she was excommunicated for a while, and throughout this trial she continued to just trust in God. Eventually she was cleared and welcomed back into the church, and then throughout this investigation, they saw that no, she was completely blameless. It was just an attack against her, and she was raised up to be Australia's first saint. And then Blessed Benedict Daswa was from South America. And I feel a special kinship with him because he was a principal. And so when I was interviewing for jobs, he was the saint I was praying to. He was born in 1946. As a boy, he herded cattle and tended his family's vegetable garden. His father died when he was young, and he helped care for his siblings. He converted to Catholicism and married Shadi Evelyn, and together they had 8 children. So again, somebody I can relate with this guy. He knows what I'm going through. One day he was washing diapers, and his friends kind of started making fun of him, saying, what are you doing this woman's work? He said, oh, nonsense. These are my kids too. He prayed with his wife every morning and evening, and then he became a principal in 1977. During his time as a principal, he built 5 new classrooms, a community garden, a soccer field. He convinced. There's the stories that have been reported. One man said how he was going to marry off his daughter at a young age, and Benedict came to him and convinced him to let his daughter finish her education. But in South Africa, at this time, and still today, there's many people who believe in different types of witchcraft. And so he was very, very outspoken against this. So in 1990, there were many houses in their community that were hit by lightning. And so the community gathered together, and it said each family needs to contribute so much money, and we're going to hire a Sangoma, which was basically a witch doctor that was going to come in and find out who was responsible for all these houses getting hit by lightning, who was calling this down. And Benedict refused to pay this witch doctor. He said, they could very easily say it's an innocent person, and you just all believe them. And so within that week, he was driving his sister-in-law and her sick child to the hospital. On his way back, there was a branch in the road, and when he got out to move it, rocks started flying at him. And so he took off running, and he ran across the soccer field that he had helped to build before he fell down. They surrounded him. They said, "Where is your God now, Daswa?" And his final words were, "Into your hands, God, into your hands receive my spirit." And so when he was beatified, his wife died in 2008 of cancer, but when he was beatified, his mother was there, and his 8 children were there when he was raised up to be Blessed Benedict Daswa. So we have these wonderful saints all throughout the world, but we also have so many great saints here from the United States. St. Frances Cabrini is the first American citizen to be canonized. She was born in Italy. Her mother was 52 when she was born. She was the youngest of 13 children. But she became a sister, and she wanted to be a missionary to China, but when the Pope said not to the east, but the west. And so she came to America, and she founded 67 different institutions, including hospitals, orphanages, schools that helped immigrants. She took more than 20 transatlantic voyages to visit the institutions she founded, and also institutions in America and in Europe. Even though she would get incredibly seasick more than 20 of these voyages. And she died in her rocking chair, making dolls for the orphans in preparation for a Christmas party. So even to the very end, she continued to serve the poor. There's so many great stories. The story about her beatification miracle, basically the doctor accidentally, and they used to put silver nitrate in the baby's eyes, and it's supposed to be a 1% solution, and the doctor accidentally put a 50% solution in this child's eyes. And so he was blinded, but his family prayed to St. Francis Cabrini. This child, his name is Peter Smith. He would later become a priest and would be present at her canonization. When she was canonized, over 120,000 people were there at the Chicago Bears Stadium for the Mass where she was canonized. St. Katharine Drexel, a lot of people in the diocese know about her and how she inherited this fortune from her father. She became a sister and gave away millions of dollars to help found schools for African American children and Native American children. What I didn't know till recently was that she had a heart attack when she was 77 years old. And so after this heart attack, she still lived for 20 more years. She was very active going to visit all these schools, but after her heart attack, she just had to spend the rest of her life at a convent. And that was very difficult for her. She lived for 20 more years, and the sister said what a grace that was that she held on for so long, because once she died, the stipulations of the will were that then they stopped receiving their annual payments from her father's fortune. And so that she was able to live for those 20 more years, it was able to help so many more children. St. Damien of Molokai, priest famous for going to the leper colonies. It was actually his brother that was ordered to go to Hawaii. But when his brother got sick, Damien volunteered to take his place. Eventually he contracted leprosy from the people that he was serving. And then a saint that worked alongside him there in Hawaii was St. Marianne Cope. We believe this is the first photograph we have of two canonized saints together. That's St. Marianne Cope beside him at his funeral. St. Marianne Cope was a very interesting woman herself. Her parents immigrated from Germany when she was 1 year old. She went to Catholic school until 8th grade, but then she started working in a factory to support her family. Later she became a sister, then a teacher, then a principal. And then in 1883, she received a request from the King of Hawaii asking for sisters to come help care for the lepers. This king had heard no from 50 different religious orders, but Sister Marianne told him yes. And even though many of the people who worked with them did contract the disease themselves, miraculously, Sister Marianne Cope never did. She's the saint that me and my teachers pray to in the middle of flu season. We don't get sick from all the kids coughing and sneezing directly on us. All right. So for a while, the question was, who is going to become the first American-born man to be beatified? St. John Henry Newman is the first male American saint, and then St. Damien of Molokai, but neither one of them were born in the United States. And so that honor for first American-born man to be beatified goes to Solanus Casey. He was born in 1870 in Wisconsin. He was the sixth of 16 children. Some of the jobs he worked when he left home at 17, he was a lumberjack and a hospital orderly, a prison guard, a streetcar operator, before discerning his vocation, and then he went to the seminary. But he really struggled there. When he became a Capuchin friar, he was not given permission to preach or to hear confessions, since they did not believe his knowledge of theology was deemed at the proper level. And so he was made the doorkeeper of his order in Detroit, and then his reputation began to spread as someone that would listen to people's problems and counsel them, and miracles would happen. And so people would line up around the block just for a chance to have time to visit with Father Solanus Casey. Our second American-born blessed was just in this last year. Stanley Rother grew up in Oklahoma. Let's see here. He was also asked to leave the seminary because of his inadequate grades, especially in Latin. But the bishop gave him a second chance. And so then he decided he wanted to go to Guatemala to be a missionary there, to serve the people there. He learned Spanish, and then during his 13 years there, he also learned their tribe's native language, Tzutil, and he learned how to say Mass in this language. It had never been a written language before the priest came, and so he helped to translate the New Testament into the Tzutil language. At this time, though, in Guatemala, a civil war was breaking out, and there was a lot of opposition against the Catholic Church. And so his name appeared on the death list of the soldiers, and so he was ordered to return back to Oklahoma, but he pleaded with his bishop. In times of trouble, the shepherd cannot run. And so he was allowed to go back to Guatemala. And within a few months of being back, men broke into his house and shot him twice in the head in 1981. Venerable Fulton Sheen. And so this always happens to me. This is the part of the talk where I have to start saying, okay, I'm going to pass on this story. So many great stories, so many great quotes from Fulton Sheen. This would be a good time for me to get a drink of water before. So yeah, if you want something to Google, so his TV program, Life is Worth Living, 30 million viewers and listeners tuned in each week, and then it just kind of went off the air all of a sudden, and it wasn't until after his death that it kind of came out why he got shuttled off TV. So that's a story to definitely look into. There were some other people that were very jealous and angry of him, and even though they really wronged him, he never spoke out against them in his lifetime. His miracle that they've sent off to hopefully raise him up to be a blessed there was a stillborn baby, 61 minutes of no heartbeat and breathing. The mother prayed to Fulton, and the baby took his first breaths as doctors prepared to announce his death. So they said he was going to grow up with defects and organ failure, but after the child's first 5 months, he was considered to be a normally healthy child. There are a lot of Fulton Sheen quotes I really love, but Venerable Pierre Toussaint. When we look at what makes a saint, so many times you see priests and sisters becoming saints. Pierre Toussaint was a hairdresser in New York City. He was born a slave, but he escaped to the north. He became a very popular hairdresser among New York's high society. He saved up money to buy his sister's freedom. He married his wife Juliet, purchased her freedom, adopted her niece. He attended morning mass, 6 a.m. mass, for 66 years. He dedicated his life to many charities, including the School for Black Children and building St. Patrick's Cathedral. He helped to support an orphanage that St. Elizabeth Ann Seton started. When urged to retire, he said, "Well, I have enough for myself, but if I stopped working, I would not have enough to help others." And so his story really resurfaced 90 years after his death. There was a priest in New York named Father McTeague, and he had some black students who asked him, "Father, are there any black saints in heaven?" And so he had researched and found the story of this man that was just known as Saintly Pierre. And so now his story is coming to light, has been declared venerable, and there is one miracle that they've sent off. So hopefully he'll be beatified soon as a blessed. Servant of God Augustus Tolton. Right now, just this last week on the news, there are reports that soon he will be declared venerable. His mother escaped from slavery, by crossing the Mississippi River in a rowboat with her children into the free state of Illinois, and Augustine was one of those children she took in this rowboat. He became the first black student at a Catholic school. He was rejected by all American seminaries, so he went to Rome to study and became the first recognized black priest in America when he came back. With the help of money from Sister Katharine Drexel, he built St. Monica's Parish in Chicago for black Catholics. Dorothy Day could probably, you could easily fill a whole hour-long talk just with the very complex woman, Dorothy Day. In her early life, she had an abortion, she attempted suicide, she had affairs, but then converted to Catholicism, was a journalist, a social activist, founder of the Catholic worker movement, and just a woman that always told it exactly like it was. And then servant of God, Vincent Capodanno, he was a chaplain during the Vietnam War. I was hoping, when I usually give this talk, I have a lot longer to talk to teachers, and we go kind of through all 2,000 years of church history. So I was like, how many saints am I going to be able to get through in an hour here? So I thought, well, maybe I'll need a little filler. So there's a video. Chris Stefanik does some great YouTube videos. He's got a great one about Father Capon, and he has a really good one about Vincent Capodanno. So if you'd like to learn more about him, I'd start with that YouTube video because it summarizes it nicely. So that's our American saints, just some of the ones that I've chose. There's many more in the process of becoming saints, but I thought I'd finish up just kind of by going through some of our other saints throughout the last 150 years. But I'm really going to have to be picky here. So I think I'm going to really focus more on the ones that maybe you haven't heard of. I think most of you know about St. John Bosco. Hopefully you've heard about some of the dreams that he would have. I love the dream of seeing the ship that the Pope was the captain of being attacked on all sides. And it was only when they sailed the ship between the pillars of the Eucharist and Mary that they were safe from all attacks. John Bosco he also had a joyful heart and wanted to help the youth of his city and started a lot of programs for the youth. Blessed John Henry Newman was an Anglican priest, very well known, and so when he converted to Catholicism at the age of 44, it was a scandal in the Anglican Church. But I think there's a lot of saints that we only have pictures of them from when they were older, so sometimes I'll try and find pictures of them younger, but even when he was younger up there in the corner, he pretty much looked exactly the same. And I don't know if you've ever seen this movie from Pixar. It's an uncanny resemblance. Saint Zelie and Louis Martin are the first married couple canonized together. They were the mother of Saint Therese. Saint Zelie and Saint Louis were the mother and father of Saint Therese of Lisieux. And so both of them thought they had a vocation to the religious life, but when they applied to become a sister, to become a priest, they were directed away from it. And so Zelie wrote, "Since I am not worthy to become thy spouse, Jesus, I will enter the married state so as to fulfill thy will. I beg thee, however, to send me many children, and grant that they may be consecrated to thee." And so Zelie was a lace maker, and Louis was a watchmaker. They first saw each other while crossing this bridge in Alençon, France, and Zelie heard an interior voice, which she understood to be Mary, saying, "This is the one I have prepared for you." And so they were introduced by Louis's mother, who attended a lace-making class with Zelie, and they became married. And so Zelie's wedding dress was later repurposed to become a priestly vestment there on the right. The two roses at the bottom represent Louis and Zelie, and the five opened lilies surrounding Jesus' holy face are their 5 daughters who grew up, who all became sisters. There's also several lilies that are not opened. Those 4 unopened buds represent the 2 sons and 2 daughters that Zelie and Louis lost at very young ages. Also on their wedding day, Louis, a custom in France at the time was to exchange a wedding medallion. And so Louis fashioned this coin that has Sarah and Tobias, their meeting from Scripture on one side and their wedding date on the other side. Eventually, though, Zelie became very, very sick. She had cancer, and she died. Let's see. I'm not seeing how old. She died leaving behind these 5 daughters. She had gone to Lourdes, and while she was there, she received peace, but no healing. And so then Louis had to carry on, and eventually one by one his 5 daughters left to enter the religious life. His last daughter, Celine, she waited for quite a while before going to tell her father that she believed she had a vocation as well. And she was afraid how he would take the news, but she wrote in her diary that when she finally told him, he said, "Come, we will go together to visit the Blessed Sacrament, to thank the Lord for the graces he has granted to our family, and for the honor he has paid me in choosing all the daughters in my house to be his brides. It is a great, great honor for me. The good Lord desires to take all of my children. If I had anything better, I would not hesitate to offer it to him." And so it was in that holy home of prayer and hard work that the soul of St. Therese was nurtured. St. Therese is one of my favorite saints, but I think she's pretty well known. The story of how when she was a young child, she was dying and she saw this statue of Mary smiling at her. On the right, we have a picture of her in the convent where they put on a play of St. Joan of Arc, and she was chosen to play St. Joan. And her book, A Story of a Soul, has inspired millions of people through the ages. So many beautiful quotes, and her little way of sanctity is just a great example to all of us. Blessed Hildegard Burjan, though, I'm going to try to stick to these saints that I'd never heard of until really going into and doing more research. Hildegard, she was a convert from the Jewish faith. In 1909, she developed a serious condition in her kidneys that nearly took her life. While she was in the hospital, there was a group of religious sisters that were praying for her recovery, and Hildegard considered her recovery a miracle. It was through the witness of those sisters that she wanted to learn more about Catholicism, and she wanted to be baptized. And so later, she got married, and later she became pregnant. But her health the doctors advised her with her health to undergo an abortion to spare her from further kidney problems. But she rejected their advice, decided to carry through with her risky pregnancy, and her baby was born in perfect health. She was a social worker and became a member of Austrian Parliament. So this is the photo of Austrian Parliament, and she's that one woman right there in the front. She founded the Caritas Socialis Society, made up of women devoted to helping the sick. She also opened homes for single mothers and homeless women, soup kitchens for the poor. She died in 1933 at the age of 50. Her motto was completely devoted to God and to humanity. We need more leaders like Blessed Hildegard Burjan. St. Francesco and Jacinta, 2 of the Fatima visionaries. St. Maria Goretti, the martyr for purity. St. Pius X, again, another one of those saints you only see pictures of when he was Pope. But pictures from him as a young priest and as a bishop. He was the Pope that decided to lower the First Communion age. So, there's we just passed blessed St. Francesco, St. Jacinta, St. Maria Goretti. These were at young ages, they sacrificed their life. They offered up their sufferings. And so St. Pius X recognized that the young can be holy too, and they should not be held back from receiving Jesus in the Eucharist. St. Faustina, Jesus appeared to her and showed her his divine mercy. He also told her from Poland, Jesus said, "From Poland the spark will come that will set the earth on fire. From Poland will come the spark that will prepare the world for my coming." Speaking about John Paul II. Blessed Martinus Pascual. We don't know much about him. He was a martyr from the Spanish Civil War, but I can't not include him because my godson is named, his middle name's Martin, after this great saint. When the Civil War broke out, he was the priest that went and immediately went into the church to save the consecrated hosts in the tabernacle. He was eventually captured. This picture was taken right before his execution. The person on the right is one of the soldiers that shot him, and he blessed the soldiers and prayed for them before he was killed. And again, just great examples to show to our young children. But Blessed Eduardo Foccarini is another one of those saints that now that I'm older, I really identify more with his life. He was known as the Italian Schindler. When he was finally arrested in Italy during World War II, he had helped to save 105 Jewish lives. He was a journalist, and so he was able to get papers and visas for these Jews to escape from Italy. At the time when he was arrested, he was 37 years old. He'd been married for 14 years. He had 7 kids. Right now I'm 37, 14 years old, and I don't know if I've saved anyone's life. But I love these family photos we have of him with his children. Just what led him to this point in his life. He was very involved, and very involved in his parish. He was a president of Catholic Action. He was involved in the St. Vincent confraternity, helping the poor, a group called Unitalzi that helped the sick, involved in Catholic Scouts. He was the director of the Catholic newspaper and built a network to obtain forged identity cards and accompanied them to the Swiss border. When him and his wife were talking about, should we do this? It puts our whole family at risk. His wife Maria said, "We and our children are safe. The Jews are not.